Okay. Alrighty. So why don't we just give it one more minute for people to come in, and then
can you hear me okay?
Take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, good.
I'm having to use my phone. So.
Are you still using your phone, Lindsay?
I am. I can't get on my laptop to work.
I love your hair color, Lindsay. I haven't seen it since you changed it. That's cute.
Thank you.
Looks good. All right, why don't we get started?
Sounds good.
Go on ahead, Deanna and Lindsay.
Okay, I'll take it over from here. So welcome to our Chahta Tosholi speaker series. Thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to take a minute to give a quick shout out to Megan Baker. She's the magic behind the speaker series, and there's a lot of work that goes on every 2 weeks between PR and organization and run-throughs and scheduling. So a big yokel key to Megan for all of her help. I also wanted to just take a second to encourage everybody who's watching or listening today to maybe grab those youth in your life. If you're at work and you're listening, maybe give them a quick text. If you have them in there playing Fortnite, maybe grab them and coming in here, or even just have kind of a mental note to come back to this WebEx conversation, and maybe open up maybe a dinner time discussion about different programs that are available for youth that are either in high school or early starting out in their college career. Today, we're going to be talking about Native American studies, archaeology, anthropology, and some programs that are just right in our backyard at East Central University. So join us or wrangle them in to see if maybe they're interested, so we can encourage our young folks to go into these fields and the STEM fields. So I'll start off with introductions, and then I'll let everybody else go and kind of introduce themselves a little bit. I'm Deanna Bird. I work at the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma Historic Preservation Department. I serve as our NAGPRA liaison. I work very closely with Dr. Ian Thompson and Misty Madbull to work collaboratively with institutions, museums, agencies across the United States. And we work under the legislation of NAGPRA to open up discussions about repatriating our ancestors. So if you ever want to know a little bit more about how I serve our tribe, please email me or give me a call. I'm super passionate about what I do and our work that we do. And so I will talk your ear off about that. I do wear a few other hats in our office, and so I'm a registered professional archaeologist. I help out with the archaeology program from time to time. I help out with exhibit design and historic research, helping put content into articles, giving presentations, and of course, I love engaging with the youth. One of those historical topics that is really rewarding for me in my research is the Trail of Tears, particularly the later Trail of Tears in 1902, 1903. And we are doing a documentary that should be out in November, so look for that. But it was during this filmmaking with Chahta filmmaker Mark Williams that we were interviewing Scott. So I got the privilege of meeting Scott for the first time in person, and I was super impressed with his Choctaw culture and history expertise. And so when Megan approached me about this Tosholi series, I was like, of course, we've got to bring Scott on. And during this interview, he raved and raved about Holly and the initiatives they're starting at East Central, the Native American Studies program, and her passions, and the start of an archaeological field school. So we've invited them here today for you guys to listen to a little bit about research and their initiatives. Hopefully you guys can chime in with some questions. But for now, I'll turn it over to Lindsay. So Lindsay, go ahead.
I'm Lindsay Ballou. I'm the Senior Compliance Review Officer for the Choctaw Nation Historic Preservation Department. Law that I work under is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. That act dictates that federal agencies, if they are going through a ground undertaking, or if they're funding serving undertaking, then they are required by law to consult with the tribes to they are not going to impact any cultural, sacred, traditional cultural properties, area, any area of concern to the tribe. So we work in a 9-state area. We have Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, and Oklahoma, and Arkansas. I actually graduate of the University of Oklahoma Native American Studies program. Got that in college. I was working on his master, and so we've known each other for a few years. We're on a debate team at the University of Oklahoma, the Council of American Studies, and that prepared me for working with my job and dealing with intense situations. Not argue, get our point across when we are with federal agencies, and also it with my presentation. I do love doing presentations, and I also love doing over historical trauma was area college. So I enjoy working with Dr. Thompson and the rest of our crew, and it's very rewarding. I will turn it up.
So Scott and Holly, can you both tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, maybe where you grew up, and what positions you hold now?
Yeah. Holly Co, thank you, all of you, Megan, for putting this together, and Lindsay, thank you all for inviting us. My name is Scott Ketchum. I grew up in the Ardmore area, and from there I moved to UConn. That's where I finished high school and was introduced to debate. I was a high school debater, and that took me to college my first time as a political scientist. But my primary area, I had an opportunity to go into Native American studies, and one of my very passionate areas is both tribal sovereignty and the preservation of culture. And so I got an opportunity to come over and work with, an opportunity to do debate at the University of Oklahoma that Lindsay mentioned. And that brought me there. And from there, my real interest had always been, I think a lot of us, not to steal Dr. Jones's thunder, but I mean, come on, she's an archaeologist named Dr. Jones. I mean, as a kid, any of us growing up with Indiana Jones, that was a big thing. And I'm a Star Wars fan and Indiana Jones. So as a kid growing up, that was my first exposure to that kind of stuff. I love the old documentary films. And so, but also just learning about Choctaw culture has always been a passion of mine. And so now I am an associate professor, or assistant professor, and the Choctaw, or the Chickasaw Nation Endowed Chair of Native American Studies at East Central University. And it's a great opportunity for me, after spending a few years as a research scientist at OU, to bring in the skills I've learned in the field and my passion for the classroom and teaching, to bring that all together. And so that's why I'm very excited about this opportunity to talk about this, and also the journey that we're on at ECU now.
Well, I guess it's my turn. I'm Dr. Holly Jones, and I actually grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Keller, Texas. Highway 377 runs right through my hometown. I have lived and traveled all over the U.S. Thanks to my job in archaeology. I am assistant professor of archaeology and cultural resource management at ECU. I earned my bachelor's and master's degrees in anthropology from the University of Texas at Arlington, and my PhD in anthropology from the University of Missouri in Columbia under the direction of Dr. Raymond Wood. I have worked, and it would be easier to list the states I haven't worked in than it would be the ones I have. Having the majority of my career in cultural resource management and archaeological surveys and things like that. But I taught graduate and undergraduate courses at Idaho State University and Missouri State University, and now ECU. I love teaching. And my experiences with the students and developing this program is one of the most exciting things I think I've ever done. So that's just about me. Pretty simple. And yes, I have gotten so many jokes from the students about the duck. I love it. It's fun.
Yeah, I bet you have. Well, I've had an experience of being able to travel all over the United States, and I couldn't imagine doing it with archaeology. So that's really exciting, and I bet you have a lot of rewarding experiences to bring to the students. So that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for introducing yourself. Just going back for both you and Scott, what really piqued your interest? I know that you both mentioned Indiana Jones and kind of doing getting into the historical documentaries, but what was that turning point for you, maybe in high school or as a youth, that made you think, you know what, I think I might try anthropology? Was it always something you knew, or was it something you kind of explored a little bit before you settled on it?
I'll go ahead and take that first. For me, and I want to, speaking out there to a lot of the students out there, and students who may watch this, it was something that I wanted to do, but didn't necessarily know how to do. And as I got into school, I started out at UCO for my bachelor's work, and they really didn't have a lot of the classes that supported necessarily an anthropology degree. And so for me, I think it's something that was always there because I've always had an interest in, prehistory, materiality, and then, just because of my Choctaw heritage, a desire to preserve and to continue the things that, and the stories, to carry those on. And I think that was always a passion in the background of my life. But I think that as time went on, I kind of got more on the political side. It's very easy to get active, and to see as you learn some of these histories, you learn there's a lot of injustice that has happened to a lot of Native people, particularly, speaking of the documentary we're talking, you mentioned, a lot of people may not know that a lot of Mississippi Choctaws that were brought here were basically treated as slaves and were forced into labor. And so being able to tell those stories, I think, what I'm saying to the students is you may not know the exact path or how to get there, and it may take time. Life is a journey. And so one of the things that I really realized is that as I got to OU, that a lot of opportunities were there. And so getting with the right people and having the right mentors, people like Jerry Brad, Barbara Hobson, and of course, you cannot forget Joe Watkins, who was the director of Native American Studies at the time when I started. They all really opened the door, and I knew that I was wanting to work on tribal systems, but you can't do that in political science. And that's another thing I want to kind of mention to students is some of the areas that you may want to work with that relate to tribal studies may not be perfectly set into a discipline like political science. And so a lot of the study of tribal systems has been done in the humanities and in anthropology. So it just became a natural transition for me. I think it was always there. It was the desire. And as more and more as I work in it, I realized that I feel like home. This is what I wanted to be doing.
Thanks, Scott. What about you, Holly?
Well, my path was a little different. I was a music major for years. I had studied piano and added French horn and jazz studies, and I thought I wanted to be, I thought I wanted to earn a degree in music. But by the time I was in college, I was already playing gigs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I was already teaching private lessons. And one day I woke up and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. Just the lifestyle. And I just, this was back in the days before course catalogs were online. So I went over to campus and grabbed a course catalog. And obviously I didn't get very far. I stopped with the A's. I read about anthropology, which truthfully, I may have had a slight understanding of it, but when I read about the courses that they taught and the focus of the degree, I was fascinated by learning about cultures and language and archaeology. And I thought, this is just absolutely fascinating. So I went right back to campus and changed my major. I'd never had an anthropology course, but I've never looked back. It was just, it suited my interests and I guess my just desire to learn more about other cultures and to help eventually to help preserve those. So yeah, mine was a little twisted there.
Yeah. But it sounds like both of you and like myself, and I know Lindsay and I've talked about it and other people in our program, that really it was a leap of faith, right? You get there and you're like, okay, I'm going to take these baby steps towards this decision. So, Lindsay's talked to me, Scott, about the Council of Fire a little bit, and it sounds like that was a really rewarding experience from you. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that. And then also, Holly, what are some experiences that, once you got into your program, once you got to college, that you were like, yeah, this is really it, that continued to kind of keep you going?
Absolutely. The Council of Fire, the idea behind it, it really goes back to the Council of Fire and some of the very early Native Americans who excelled as scholars in America. And so that was kind of the idea of that. And then that movie, The Great Debaters, Dr. Brad kind of just wondered why Native people are great orators and have always been known to be great speakers. And unfortunately, the old story about the tribal council meeting that breaks out into a fight was always there. And so it was, how can we, really start using some of the best of our own abilities? And so he came over and visited. I was coaching debate at UCO, and we were doing quite successful in NDT style debate, seated debate. And he posed this idea of coming and putting together a group of people that, that were from the Native American Studies program, and that we would, cover some of the very controversial topics. And the first one we dealt with was the removing of the freedmen in Cherokee Nation. And we took the very first debate to one of their, national meetings and put a debate on. And so some of the original people, Walela Carey, Monty Randall, Hoist, Heap of Birds, Jan-Marie Supka, of course, Dr. Brad being very passionate, and then Dr. Joe Watkins, as the director supporting us. Lindsay also, we went out to several different places, Cliff Tonkawa, I can't even, trying to remember everybody's name. It's been so many years. This started in 2008, so it's been over 12 years, but we started having a group at OU that met regularly and went around doing debates. It culminated in a couple of students actually getting involved in competitive debate. We had Tana Little and David Colbert who went and participated and did really, really well. And then one of the most outstanding persons that came out of it in terms of debate and debating nationally for OU was Jesse Robbins. If you're familiar with Jesse Robbins, MC Red Eagle, and he is very passionate himself about raising awareness for Choctaw people. And so that was really the goal, was just to show people that, that we could use discussion and to discuss ideas and come out with better decision making and deliberate on things like that through kind of, giving, study techniques. And as Lindsay mentioned, if you're going to work with tribal for a tribal nation, doing presentations, having to argue that sovereign relationship becomes a big thing. And so it was a great place to kind of set up that training. And so a lot of people that came out of it have gone on to law school and doing very successful things. So I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Awesome.
Well, I guess for myself, I had two really significant experiences as an undergraduate. First was my field school. We went to Devil's Tower National Monument in the Black Hills of northeastern Wyoming, and our job was to collect data on all of the user groups at Devil's Tower National Monument. And for those who may not know, Devil's Tower is a sacred place to many tribes. And so we worked with a number of tribal cultural monitors who taught us how to identify and map cultural or spiritual uses of the tower, always under their guidance. And it was just amazing. We also interviewed rock climbers. Devil's Tower it's a big place for rock climbing. It's very, people from all over the world, rock climbers from all over the world come there to climb. And the reason we were collecting all of this data was to help the National Park Service, the superintendent at Devil's Tower, revise their management plan. And they wanted all of this data to be able to make decisions about that. And I learned so much from the tribal cultural monitors during those 6 weeks that we were there. Things that, you can read about, and if you're not a tribal member like myself, having that voice and that experience in teaching you the importance and the significance of these things was just, I mean, it was irreplaceable. I'll cherish those 6 weeks for the rest of my life. We also interviewed rock climbers. We interviewed tourists. So we were trying to collect as much data for the Park Service as possible. But the thing that I took away from it, it was a statement by one of the tribal cultural monitors, and I wish I could remember his name, but again, it was a lot of years ago, so forgive me. But we were interviewing him about what it's like for a tribal member to be carrying out a spiritual activity and then look up at the tower and see all these rock climbers on the tower. And he said, imagine, and he said this to the class, imagine if you went to church on Sunday and a rock climber was climbing your steeple, how would that make you feel? And it was things like that, things that really hit home and made sense and made it just so much more significant and important to me to want to work with tribes and preserve these areas and allow their voice to be heard in these management plans, because so often, as we all know, these voices are typically ignored. And in fact, my professor's report to the National Park Service was rejected because he recommended closing rock climbing at the tower, and I guess that just didn't fit in with their model. So that was my first major experience. And the second one was the same professor. He was my undergraduate and master's thesis professor. He also had earned his PhD from the University of Missouri with Dr. Wood. So I kind of got a double dose there. But he worked with a landowner in southern southwest, I guess it would be Tarrant County. And so it was close to the university. And there was a landowner that had a site, and she wanted him to come check it out. And he insisted that any of us who wanted to get graduate degrees in anthropology, we needed to get out there, even if we didn't want to be archaeologists. At that time, I was more interested in being a cultural anthropologist. But he drug us out there and said, you have to do this. And I fell in love with it. Absolutely. We worked out, we identified 2 sites, and these were early Caddoan village sites that had been occupied for thousands of years. I worked out there for 3 years, almost year round. Day after day, we'd get out of class and a group of us would run out to the site and we'd work. And I waited tables in the evenings at the time, so I'd run home and get cleaned up and go to work. We'd work weekends. We worked almost all year round. And when the weather didn't permit, we worked in the lab to catalog and curate the artifacts. And it was just, even though it was not a paid position, I was able to take that experience and put that on my resume, and that helped me get into graduate school. It helped me to get jobs in the future, and it was just in archaeology. It was just, and those are the kinds of experiences I want to give our students. I was so fortunate to have those kinds of experiences, and it makes a huge difference than just sitting in a classroom and reading and learning about things, and that's what I want to pass on to our ECU students.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think Lindsay and I both, I think one of mine, solidifying moments, knowing that I was, meant to be in this program, meant to be in this field was, those conversations with other students and professors. They really help shape and kind of solidify that. So thank you for sharing those experiences with us. I just wanted to go into a little bit further detail. So Scott, can you please tell us a little bit about, your research interest now with some of the kind of initiatives that you're starting? I know that you're really big on stickball. And so can you tell us a little bit about the cultural preservation issues that are important to you and some of the projects that you are holding heart, your passion projects for us? Oh, did we lose him? We might have lost them. We're having storms up in their direction, so we might have lost them. Holly, would you like to tell us a little bit about the archaeology program and the CRM focus that you're bringing to the archaeology program? A little bit about the field school that Scott raved about. I'm really excited. Unfortunately, I guess you guys had to cancel because of COVID this summer. But can you tell us a little bit about the infusion of cultural resource management and archaeology, which is kind of uncommon in archaeology programs, but very needed. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, certainly. Well, my experience with fusing CRM with archaeology actually began when I was working at Missouri State University. They were developing a master's program specifically in cultural resource management. And so I taught some of the graduate courses there. And then when I came here, they, expressed that they wanted a specialized cultural resource management track within the Native American Studies program. So I've never had any Native American Studies courses, or, I didn't study that, but I felt like, hey, this is an excellent match. And so really the program, it's a specialized track. So students who are interested in cultural resource management can earn a degree in Native American Studies. Their diploma would actually read Native American Studies - Cultural Resource Management. And so the focus of the CRM program that I'm taking it, yes, I teach archaeology courses because as those of us, as you well know, involved in it, a lot of people think CRM is synonymous with archaeology, but it's not. I mean, at least it shouldn't be. To quote Dr. Thomas King, whose text I use in my Intro to Cultural Resource Management class, he was the former director of the National Historic, pardon me, I just said that wrong, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. The way he puts it, or I'm summarizing it, is that cultural resource management is really about the places and the spaces and the activities that are important to people. And it's about the tangible, the things that you can feel and touch, as well as the intangible, such as language and music and dance and, stories, oral traditions, things like that. It's all of that, or at least it should be. And there's so much more work to be done to bring cultural resource management up to where it needs to be. And I'm hoping that our next generation of students can be a part of that. And I believe having more tribal student involvement in that would be essential in North America. So the program, essentially, they would get their degree in Native American Studies, and then I teach courses that lead to that specialized track. I teach archaeological theory and method, intro to cultural resource management. I teach intro to cultural anthropology as well. And then I'm developing some new senior seminar courses. So for example, this fall I'll be teaching pre-contact archaeology, and then hopefully in the spring I'll teach post-contact archaeology. But the field school is my big gem, my big goal. Because in order for students to have a broad understanding of cultural resource management, they do need some archaeological field experience. And the field school will be local, and I can't necessarily say where we're going to be having it. We had it all outlined, and the site I'd like to work on is on private land. And the property owners are wonderful, and they're very supportive of this program and ECU, but we just don't have a signed contract in place. But I can tell you, if we do get to work at the site we plan, it's incredibly important to our understanding of pre-contact archaeology in Oklahoma, as well as the Great Plains. And it's local. It's just within a few miles of Ada. The field school will run that first intersection, it would be the intercession right after graduation. It would be the first 3 weeks. It would be Monday through Friday. I'm looking at 7:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, and I know those are long hours, but I hope to have students back on campus, say by 4 o'clock, so we can unload and clean the equipment and get any artifacts in the lab and things like that. And that still would allow students time if they had evening jobs. I would hope. That's my goal. And having it local makes it much more financially feasible for students. A lot of our students, and this was the same at Missouri State University, many of our students have families and they work and they have jobs. And so we want to make it as accessible to everyone as possible. But they will be learning so much. They'll be learning about mapping. We have a toll station, so they will learn how to use survey equipment. They'll be learning not non, but at least the least destructive methods for survey, including metal detection surveys. There'll be some shovel testing, and then they will also learn some formal excavation techniques, time permitting, and depending on what we find. So they'll learn how to identify artifacts. And you know, it's one thing for them to sit in a classroom and look at pretty pictures of artifacts. It's quite another to be in the field and finding tiny fragments of those artifacts that are covered in soil. And you know, and it's so funny. I love to watch the transformation in my archaeological field school students, because the first week they know nothing and they're terrified they're going to mess something up. And they're like, is this an artifact? Is this an artifact? Am I filling out this one right? And by the end, they are the experts. You know, they've got it. And it's just, I love watching that light bulb come on. And so the 3-week field school is 3 credit hours for those students who are interested in actually becoming archaeological technicians. I encourage them to take 6 credit hours of, you know, repeat the course for up to 6 credit hours. That way, if they were to apply for jobs, that's sort of the industry standard, 6 credit hour field school. It will contain a lab component as well, probably rain days, because, you know, since we're doing 3 weeks, we will probably have rain days. If not, I'll set aside time so that they learn how to process the artifacts and learn how to clean and catalog and curate and enter the information into databases and things like that. So, I mean, I'm trying to make it as holistic as possible and as accessible as possible, and still give them, you know, the training that they will need to get jobs. So.
That's awesome. I think it's really awesome. I was really excited to hear about it. Thank you for sharing all the nitty gritty details, because those are things that, you know, you have to kind of Google and look up online and try to contact. So thank you for sharing that with us. I know that it's really important regionally. You know, I was living out in Portland, and I thought it was interesting that even though I'm a registered professional archaeologist, that a lot of the challenges that I was finding in getting a job in our industry is that I didn't have experience in that region. And so, you know, it's very important that if you're going to work with tribes, you're going to work in Oklahoma, and in this region in general, that you need to have those specialized skills. I remember when I first started, you know, my background is in Caribbean archaeology. My field school was in Missouri. So coming on board for the Choctaw Nation, I was out in the field with Dr. Thompson. And I remember just kind of handing him those little iron nuggets, you know, and be like, what's this? What's this? Is this something? He's like, it's a rock. It's a rock. It's a rock. And I was like, okay, what about this one? He's like, that's not a rock. So it was really interesting. I needed that mentor. I needed that somebody who could kind of guide me. So to have that lengthy programming and that training and that focused attention time with an archaeologist is really a gem. When you said it was a gem, that's really something to have. So I know that a lot of tribes will probably be excited about opportunities for tribal partnership. Is that something that you have reached out to multiple tribes to work with the field school?
Mm-hmm. We have worked with, Scott and I both worked with the Chickasaw Nation, and we have a signed memorandum of agreement for collaboration. And I'm hoping that this will facilitate us an agreement with Choctaw Nation. Yes, absolutely. I want to reach out to as many of the tribes that would like to collaborate as possible. It's extremely important. And as I mentioned from my field school, having that tribal input and tribal voice can bring knowledge to the table that I can't bring. And it's so incredibly important.
Yes, it is. So I will maybe invite Lindsay to talk a little bit about, I know that our policy in our office is we do not excavate, we practice in situ preservation. And so Lindsay, do you have any questions about tailoring some of the information that goes into this field school for students?
Well, first of all, cultural resources management and art together. That's something that we don't do a lot of, or if we do, it's very, so I appreciate what, like, we try to avoid complete excavation if possible, serve in place. Radar, ground penetrating radar. Do you have anyone that's able to facilitate any training in that?
So I'm not sure. Our internet connection is really sketchy just because of the storms that are coming into northern part of Oklahoma. But Lindsay was asking about GPR, and if you have anybody that's coming out to train or that's going to be facilitating that kind of technique in your field school.
I think she's muted.
Is she muted? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're mute. There you go. There you go, Holly.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's
I'm
okay.
in between because my dogs are barking at the store, and I didn't want that to mess everything up. Okay, to answer your question again,
Okay.
I've actually used ground penetrating radar and several other methods, electrical resistivity, and I had the NCPTT national training in remote sensing techniques. And so yeah, if I owned a GPR or if we can afford to get one, I would love to do that. I absolutely love remote sensing, and it cuts down on some, archaeology. I'll be the first to say archaeology in its basic form is a destructive technique. Excavation is. And so as much remote sensing as we can get our hands on, I'd love to do it. I've done it in all of my field schools, as well as some of my own research. So if I can somehow get the funding to bring out some GPR, like ground penetrating radar equipment, I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
Very.
I think that's really important to add that element. Lindsay, you were going to say something?
I was, will you be teaching any type of mitigation, be going over mitigation on how to avoid to mitigate the adverse effect possible to happening? That can be a focus because a lot of what we do is a lot of mitigation at this point.
Absolutely, absolutely, and throughout my career, I've always worked with this, particularly for myself, the state preservation officers, as well as when I worked for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. We were always trying to find ways to mitigate, lessen the need to actually excavate, and I guess my saying has always been, there's always a way. You can always find a way to lessen the effects on sites, because this is my thoughts on it, I guess, is that archaeological sites are limited. There are only so many left, and given the fact that archaeology in and of itself is destructive, I mean, these are non-renewable resources, and the more we need to protect them, and hopefully, and my wish is that, gee, wouldn't it be great if somebody could invent some kind of technology where you could, X-ray or view through the ground so you didn't have to excavate. I mean, that would be ideal. We don't have that technology today, but maybe someday. And so my thought, and I was trained this way as well, is, we need to do the best that we can to minimize the destructive effects and do what we can to preserve and protect these precious cultural resources. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, that was a. I'm so happy that coming from an archaeological standpoint, that you're willing to mitigate and find a way on lessening impact, rather than having the mindset of we have to dig, has to go into it. These are the things that we just have to do because it's the name of archaeology.
Right.
I really point, and that's refreshing to know out there.
Yeah, I agree with Lindsay. It's really refreshing. I love doing presentations with the youth, especially high school and college students, and really just like what you had talked about earlier, is really help shape that next generation that's coming into our field. You know, we're not going to be here in 50 years, they are. And so if we can infuse some of these values, you know, like you said, in the field school, teaching them the very basic techniques that they're going to need to for industry standards to get a job, but then also infusing that with, you know, cultural preservation, you know, the need to mitigate and work with tribes and consult in a very professional and sensitive manner. And I can see this, you know, turning into, you know, maybe some opportunities for internships and job shadowing so that they get kind of an understanding of what's going on in the field. So I'm going to put a pause on that. We're going in another direction, but I did want to invite Scott, because I know you lost a little bit of your internet connection there. And I had asked you to share a little bit about your research projects, some of your initiatives that you have started and that your kind of passion projects. I know that you're a big stickball fan. And so can you tell us a little bit about your projects, and maybe in particular about the natural resource management and procuring and making stickball sticks?
Absolutely. In terms of probably my most passionate project is contemporary cultural resource management and the preservation of natural resources that are necessary for cultural materials like capucha and the use of shagbark hickory. And so that's been a big passion. That was what my dissertation work focused on, is this, you know, we're really having, this is something as tribes take over more of the control of their own natural resources locally and in their communities. And hey, you know, who knows what the recent court decision yesterday holds for, you know, for all of us of the tribes and in the sovereignty in this state. But that's been a big passionate project of mine. So, you know, continuously working with you know, the National Park Service in communicating that shagbark is an important element in making stickball sticks, and also lacrosse. One of the interesting things is that all of the East have always used shagbark hickory for their sticks for their games, and so you know, that's led to one of the projects I really want to work on. We've done a lot. So also to kind of piggyback on what Holly's talking about, you know, besides just the field school, is we've really taken an entire approach of developing a cultural preservation lab, and realizing that for a lot of our students that, you know, getting their bachelor's, they may go work for tribes now. And so, you know, installing those skills to get students ready to go and to be able to work for tribes in these areas that's a passion of mine. And so combining these new opportunities, so we've used the Hayes Center at ECU as a cultural lab to look at how would you set up you know, how would you set up, you know, art displays? How would you think about, you know, coming into a space that you would want to educate people about a tribe? But that also brings me, you know, with that, we brought in a lot of new people. So we brought in Brenner Billy. So we're offering Choctaw language, and bringing in Brenner brings in a you know, a plethora of knowledge.
Oh no, I'm holding out hope that he hangs on. We lost him. Okay, so we'll put a pin in that and come back to that. I was really interested in what he had to say about Brenner Billy and the Choctaw language, and then also, you know, Brenner's wealth of cultural knowledge. I'm sure that he's a great asset to your program, and so I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about how you do that. I think it's really important. I think, you know, this is one of those where I'm going to take a moment and ask a question, and maybe you can fuel that, Holly, with we have a student from OU, Paige Ford, with Oak Pan, and she was asking how she could help or volunteer with the creation of these amazing new programs, maybe help out with the field school, or are there opportunities for people who maybe already have their degree but really want to support this effort? What are some volunteer opportunities?
Well, I welcome any volunteer. Unfortunately, I have no grant funding at this moment, but that's something I'll be working towards. But obviously, I did years of volunteer to get experience, volunteer work to get experience. So absolutely, I would love to have a research assistant for the field school. And again, that's something, someone who's already degreed and had some experience in archaeology. I will do whatever I can to find funding to pay that person, because that is a lot of work. But there's all sorts of, I have to do so much background research and work. There's a lot of hoops I need to jump through before the field school happens. I was going to go meet with the state archaeologist and go view the existing collection for the site that I'm hoping we get to do the field school at. But travel was shut down, and so I was unable to do that. I need to get that going again and get on track with that. So I'm going to need, all kinds of help, and especially if there are any students or people with degrees who live in the Oklahoma or Norman area, Oklahoma City or Norman area. We could meet up and they could help me because I want to view the existing collection and I want to collect some data on that. In terms of my broader research goal, which is essentially the middle reaches of the Canadian River and the tributaries, the archaeology on those. I'm interested in both the pre and post-contact periods. So there's a lot of ethnohistory type work that needs to be done, a lot of documentary research and maps. So I could put anybody to work. Sadly, right now, I just don't have funds for them, but I am desperately going to find that, beg and apply for whatever I can get.
Yeah. Well, I know that's something that Scott and I had talked about, that I'm willing, whether it's on my own time, but volunteering, because again, that's one of my passions is working with that next generation. So, if there's ways that we can support you, please think about those, because I'm sure that I'm not the only one. I know that Paige is not the only one kind of going, how can I help out? So,
Right.
definitely with that. I do want to point out, so Catherine Cleveland did have a comment. She said that she wanted to add that anthropology is a broad field that opens many doors. She studied sociocultural anthropology under a legal anthropologist and cultural anthropologist and is now writing grants for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. So that's a really awesome point that we'll get to in just a minute about just how this opens doors. And maybe, it's your first kind of interest. It's something that you first kind of stumble into or maybe solidifies. But it really opens up many doors because it offers that kind of human connection and being able to really analyze data in a very unique way. So we'll get to that in a second. I see Scott's back on, so I'm going to try maybe 3 times a charm. So let's try one more time, Scott, and see if we could get this going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I don't know exactly where I was at with it, but before I got knocked off, but
Stickball and Brenner Billy. So we heard about Billy and bringing him on board, and Megan asked me to plug that he is going to be on for another Chahta Tosholi series on September 3rd. So we'll get to hear a little bit about his work with you, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. So he started teaching Choctaw, and so like I was saying is we've really turned the Hayes Center at ECU into a cultural lab to really provide our students with hands-on opportunities. So some of the things is practicing grant writing and little things that you may not realize that you're going to have to be able to do if you go into the field now. Those presentation skills, those are some of the other things that we work on. And so, just looking at curating a collection, all those kinds of things. So we've got a lot of resources at campus that we're, the whole, basically is a great opportunity with being so close to Chickasaw Nation, that, the whole town in a way it could be a lab for anyone interested in anthropology or archaeology. So bringing Brenner Billy in has been part of this process of, and for me, part of my passion of creating, coordinated and together with that are passionate about cultural materials. And so stickball sticks, having an opportunity. And so one of the goals we'd like to do eventually is to create kind of a documentary series highlighting stick makers from every tribe and telling their own personal story. So not just the tribal history, but the story of those stick makers, because without them, people like Sidney White, we would not have this, this wonderful knowledge that we've continued to be carried forward for us. And so that's one of my passionate projects. The last few years, I've been a research scientist with OU, and I've been working on health projects. And I've had an opportunity to work with Bobby Sankey, Michael Piercy at Chickasaw Nation, and then wonderful partners at South Central Foundation, working with Paul Spicer and several other people at OU. And we were part of a project looking at genomics research. Another one of our partners is a Cheyenne River Reservation. I don't want to forget all of our partners, but it was an opportunity to look at research, health research, and research being done with American Indian populations. And so for me, this brings in my interest. I am the president-elect of the Association of Indigenous Anthropologists with the Association of the American Association of Anthropology. And so with that, there's a whole that I have an opportunity to constantly be in contact with anthropologists, archaeologists, 4 fields, and so that new research that I've really gotten into is what people call CBPR, community-based participatory research, or TPR, tribal participatory research. And so it's really looking at how we collaborate with tribes, ensuring tribes are part of the entire research design process. So no more of the days of, no tangible benefits from research or research being done on us, but being done with us and with tribes being in control of that process. And so, that's, and this kind of hopefully maybe will answer some of the questions you had, Lindsay. We offer classes. We have a class on Indigenous anthropology that brings in, we highlight, people like Joe Watkins, Valerie Lambert from our tribe, another person who's contributed quite a bit on tribal sovereignty. But we highlight different anthropologists who are Native Americans or who have contributed. So going back and telling the story of Ishi, whenever people were just studying natives and looking at them and looking for the preserved, last true native out there in the field, like people like Krober and people like that were doing. We're changing, the times have come, and now people have come a long way to people like Edward Dozer, who had done so much for, research on the Southwest. And so we want to highlight those people and bring in some of the things that they've recognized as anthropology has had not always been has always been a welcoming endeavor in Indian country, but those days have changed now as tribes have anthropologists, archaeologists, laws like NAGPRA that are set up to create a little bit more ethical obligations in doing this kind of research. That's a major passion of mine, and that's something that we're bringing into in part of the hands-on process that we're giving students.
That's really awesome. And I'm glad you brought that point up. I had read a strange statistic that, it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, but just 10 years ago, 92% of those that went into the anthropology field identified as European descendants. And so that leaves a very small gap, right? And the article was talking about, encouraging Indigenous youth to go into this field and to really be able to tell the story in a very unique way. These are our narratives, and to be able to consult with our own communities and to be able to advocate for that. So I really appreciate all that you're doing and your research and the programs that you and Holly are so passionate about. I think that's awesome. So I'm really glad too. Again, plugging all those youth that are listening and all those parents and people that know youth, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, coaches, that, this is right in our back door. I know that that's a huge problem. And, it kind of happened in ours as well, that my daughter went off to college and, is you know, had that kind of longing to kind of stay connected, and she stayed in the state, you know, and so this is right here in our back door, right across the border in Chickasaw Nation. So I'm really excited, especially for our community members that are considering going into this field. So I wanted to quickly ask you guys before we got into some other questions, what are some, you know, speaking of that experience, you know, college students, you know, we typically go, okay, they're going to figure it out. But, you know, I imagine with the passion that you guys have, you understand that transition time and what some of those challenges might be for Indigenous students. What are some of the kind of clubs or programming or safety nets that you have on campus with your program that connect students, get them engaged, help make that first year a good transition year for them? Maybe offering services, like you said, Holly, that are balancing that workload between family and jobs to help them have a successful experience.
We're fortunate at ECU to have a large Native population and also a local population, and so you know, for some that creates, you know, I think one of the things that's very hard for Native students is being away from home and being away from family, and being able to go back to be able to either, you know, attend family events or whatever. And so, you know, staying local and very close to a lot of areas in Oklahoma, that's one good thing about where we're located, is that we provide students that opportunity to go to a college, but also to, you know, to be able to go back home. But at the university, we do have a Native American Student Association, and so a lot of it is students and student led. You know, you can never forget about how important student leadership is in making and setting that feeling of home. But also we have you know, we have the Nasanti grant, and so we've got a, you know, Brenner Billy, Amy Lyons Ketchum, and Dana and Rhonda Hibbert, they all work with a program that we have set up, a grant program that provides you know, opportunity for students to work on campus, and try to connect them with people that make sure that work with retention for Native students. And so you know, we have a lot of safety nets that are there to create you know, an environment for students for them to be successful. And so a lot of times they may not, you know, I think that's one of the things that when I went to college in the past, that a lot of resources, you weren't aware that they were there. And I think nowadays a lot of those resources are being out there where students can, you know, access them. And I think that's important, is having students' ability to know those resources are there, and taking opportunities like this to where we can speak about the resources we have on campus. All these are great opportunities for students to learn about what we have there for them for that first year.
That's awesome. And I know that you and Holly, you know, Holly, I haven't had much interaction with you yet, but I know that you guys are both passionate, and you seem very warm. And I'm sure that students would enjoy, you know, kind of speaking to you and the other professors there as mentors. I know that was one of the things that kind of kept me going, was being able to engage with them. So that's great. I'm glad that you have those kind of safety nets and programs. And yes, you know, that was one of the experiences I had. And also my eldest daughter going off to college, was those student-led programs are really important. And just kind of taking that, you know, even if you're sheepish, even if you're an introvert, just going maybe for that first meeting, and to keep going and really connecting, because that's really going to be key, because that's going to be your cohort. That's going to be your professional realm as you go on. So we have another question. It's from Ryan Spring. He says, Holly, one of the issues in the archaeology we have noticed is how contract archaeology has moved away from identifying the eligibility of archaeological sites. How do we approach this issue with the next generation of students?
Had to unmute.
Okay.
That's an excellent question. And in my experience, that is true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying I believe it varies from state to state. So I haven't done a project in Oklahoma in a lot of years. Most of my work has been in Missouri. And it varies based on what you find regarding the determination of eligibility. The goal, they still want you, the State Historic Preservation Officer still wants you to make a recommendation to them. Obviously, the archaeologist is like the eyes and ears of the State and Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. They're the ones that make the ultimate decision. But I have heard that in other states, and possibly here in Oklahoma, I don't know because I haven't experienced it, it wasn't brought to my attention, that there may be sort of this, what am I trying to say, this change in which maybe eligibility is being seen as less important. But I find that given that the way the laws and regulations are written, to me, it's extremely important that we determine eligibility. I mean, to me, all sites are important, right? Okay, but not all rise to the level of the federal protections. So here is what I would say regarding this, is that all states, and I assume tribal historic preservation offices as well, have to at least meet the federal requirements. However, states can exceed them, and certain states definitely do, and they do a great job. I know, for example, New Mexico, I believe Texas has much stronger rules regarding cultural preservation and archaeological site identification and recommendations. There are states out there that do exceed the federal laws, and so perhaps that is something that the next generation needs to push with their states. I mean, you know, like I said, I haven't been here long enough yet to actually see it in process here in Oklahoma, but I have worked in enough states to know that where the feds leave off, the states and tribes pick up the slack, and thereby it would still be a requirement. Did that make any sense? I hope that made sense.
It did. It did. Thank you for sharing that, Holly. And Ryan does have a follow-up question. I'll kind of preface it a little bit because it's one of the things that I had thought about prior to our talk and kind of addressing really. There was a well-known archaeological CRM project that came about in New York City a few years ago. And, you know, all of us know what that is. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but, you know, when it initially happened, the questions that were created were from kind of that old school archaeology that, you know, looked at kind of the biomechanics and bioarchaeology that was happening, and some, you know, kind of outdated methodology and research questions. And it wasn't until they got the community engaged, the descendant community engaged in those conversations, those research questions, and being able to bring them on board from across the country and involving them in the project, that's when the real rewarding, you know, kind of history and story was told. So, you know, Ryan's follow-up question is, how do we encourage students to make their research directly applicable to tribal communities in a way that they can use that these communities can use this information directly, and working with tribes from the onset. We've had experiences where just phenomenal research comes from contacting before those even research design questions are even solidified to submit to their committee. And then we've had those that kind of come and show up afterwards like, hey, this is what I've done. And we're like, okay, there's a gaping hole there, a gaping hole there. And so it's pretty obvious to us as a tribal community, but how do we encourage students? What are you and Scott going to do kind of on your end to instill the value in these students to really reach out ahead of kind of making any decisions with their research to bounce it off the tribal community that they're going to work with?
Scott, you want me to go first? I can give my opinion. Well, from the get-go in all of my classes, especially my Intro to Cultural Resource Management class, I develop mock situations and we have discussions, and the students are required to think about putting themselves in those different positions and then discussing the outcomes of that. And that also would apply to making research decisions about research. And what comes out of it is like, oh, there needs to be a lot more communication up front. So yes, my goal is to encourage, before you start, say, an archaeological project, research project, yes, you need to first identify all of the stakeholders, you know, the tribes, the community members, whatever your focus is on, you know, research focus is. Go to the stakeholders and get their input. It's important. Their input is extremely important and can help you shape your research question in such a way to be of more, not to be of more, I hate to put a value on it, but to make it of importance to those communities, as well as, you know, your own desires of answering a question or getting your degree, whatever your, you know, the individual's goals are. It makes it, and I feel like the more the communities are involved and can see that research, whether it's a student research project or a professional project, when it speaks to a community, we have more community support, and we all sitting here know that our cultural resources and the laws and regulations in place to protect them are under attack. And so I feel like the more community voice and the more engaged that the community is in one's research, um, it will benefit cultural resource management and historic preservation broadly, as well as for the individual in the communities. Did that make any, I hope that made sense.
Yeah, yeah. Scott, do you have any feedback?
You know, one of the things is just, you know, from the get-go is just that if you're going to work in Indian country, you know, collaboration is key. That's where I really start off my lessons and the methodology classes and everything. And so it's about realizing that, you know, you may have questions you want to ask and answer, but at the same time, the tribe may not be interested in those. And so there's got to be, you know, you got to meet in the middle. But at the same time, you also have to realize that a lot of these materials and these questions may come from that community and may, you know, tell this community story. And so they have a purpose and a reason why they should be consulted and be part of the process. And so that work I've done with you know, community-based participatory research is primary in what I bring into the classroom and how I will continue to shape the future. And understanding, you know, that in some instances, you may be working with a tribal entity, but they may not be a nation state. So you need to use more of a community-based participatory research approach. You may, and in another project, you may be working with a tribal entity and a sovereign nation, and so you need to use a tribal participatory research approach because in that, you know, in that instance, their sovereignty is equally as important as any other part of the research process. And so it's really about establishing this approach that it's collaborative, that we work in teams, that when you're working in Indian country, it's very, very seldom anymore going to be a very individualized endeavor, and that it requires, you know, and so you recognizing your informants from the community so that you get the histories of the area that you're going to be working on, that you get the input from the community on concerns and all of that. That should all be part of the process. And it should no longer just necessarily be about, you know, outsiders coming in doing that work, but anytime you can plug in a student that's from that community to be, you know, it should be always about, you know, building capacity in those communities you're working with as well. And it should be a multi-directional exchange of information. So just as we're learning, just as we're, you know, informing them about maybe techniques, we should be learning from them about their community. And so I think it all begins with, you know, the best way anything begins is just go and have dinner, you know, have lunch with some of the community members and talk with them before you begin any project. You know, that's the best way to start anything. And then to find out if the questions that you're asking or the information you're seeking is even important to them. You know, you may find out that what you're looking at, you didn't have all the information, and that there's a much deeper question there that you can really help provide that information to tribal communities.
That's well said. Thank you, Scott. And I'm really excited that both you and Holly are being those movers and shakers in the academic world and helping shape this future generation. That's really awesome to hear. I know that one of the questions that I always get asked when I go and I speak to college students is, where do I begin? What can I do? You know, they're just kind of all fired up. They've taken all these classes. They're really excited about that collaborative research and work and even getting into a career. They don't know where to begin. They don't know how to be an advocate. They don't know necessarily where to go in terms of their career. And so what are some career options? I know that Lindsay, you might have some follow-up questions for this about looking at those career options, but what would you advise students that are kind of in your programs about searching, you know, what that's going to look like, their next step after college? What are some options? What are some career choices? What are some things that they can put the feelers out? What are some suggestions you have for them?
I'll tackle it first. With the students, it's one of those things that, mentorship is, like you mentioned earlier, mentorship is key through this process, and having a mentor that students feel comfortable coming with, and as a mentor, knowing that, you're doing a lot of asymmetrical teaching for all, you got students going different directions and having different possibilities. And so, really for students thinking about that next step is that really around, your junior, senior year, when you start coming, finding the direction that you may be on your degree, working with your program director, working with other professors, finding that professor that you really, really feel comfortable with, and discussing some of those things, talking about what you would like to do, and thinking about, what would that, what does that entail? I was very interested in natural resource and extreme weather events. And over time, Paul Spicer as my chair over my dissertation, started pushing me in the right direction and putting me and opening up that networking with other people. And so, for instance, we have made a lot of contacts, whether it's with Choctaw Nation or Seminole Nation. We've got a lot of opportunities and internship opportunities. And so it's a matter of, listening to the students, finding out their interests, and then taking them in a direction that facilitates those interests, but at the same time allows them to grow with those interests in a way that they can turn that into a professional career. And so whether that's being in just local cultural resource management, going to work after your bachelor's degree, or thinking about, should I go towards a master's degree? Those are all things that you have to really be honest with your students about, and they all come with different things. Some may be, some may have families. Some may be in the in middle of their life. I went back to college in my late 30s and didn't finish my PhD until I was in my 40s. So it's a journey. You don't have to be on the, I got to get out of college by the time I'm 26 and have my PhD. You can do it over time. And so that's why you take that time and encourage them and help them to find what's the right place for them and what's going on in their lives too. I mean, right now, students are facing, the students today are facing things that we never faced in terms of trying to figure out how education is going to work in the future, particularly with COVID. And so, it's working with all people that can help, whether work with an Asante program to know about opportunities and getting an internship. I mean, I recommend to all students, universities have a lot of internships there, and that'll really put you in connection with people and career opportunities. And so you may find out, I wanted to work in CRM. You may get an internship and realize, oh, I don't ever want to do anything that. Then you may find out in that program, though, because you were working with the Tribal Humanities Department, that the language program was right next to it, and that you wanted to work with language. And so, it's always taking those opportunities and not seeing them, closed doors, but open doors to new opportunities.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I just had the privilege of visiting up in northern Oklahoma, a tribal community, and it was just so warm and welcoming. Their historic preservation office and their museum and their library was all very much right there in their community room. And so you get that feeling of engagement. And so it's very true. It might be just right next door, kind of unexpected. And I can see how that happens. Holly, do you have any advice?
I'm not sure I can add too much more to that. I completely agree with what Scott said. I mean, going back to my own personal experience, I thought I wanted to do cultural anthropology, and my professor drugged me out to the field. I thought archaeology was kind of cool, but I didn't see myself doing it. And then I did it, and it was like, I don't want to ever do anything else, So I do feel it's so important for them to get opportunities to try different things, because until you do it, you don't know. I find this out even with my field school students. Some come into it, they're like, I've always wanted to be an archaeologist, and that's what I want to do. And it's the outdoors. There's a lot of things you deal with in the outdoors, and the heat and the bugs and the snakes, and they find out, yeah, it's fascinating, and maybe I might want to do museum curation work, but I don't want to do field work, until you actually do something or get a taste at, through an internship, or even just a volunteer activity or something, so that you get some of that hands-on experience with a field or a direction, you may not necessarily know if it's the right one for you, and it can be trial and error. But so yes, I just encourage students to get involved. We have an archaeology club. It's growing. It's really small. We could use some members, but my goal is to hopefully be able to introduce, and it's open to anybody on campus. It's a way to reach out. We want to go out into the high schools and talk to them about the CRM program. And, we just want to do some community activities to teach people about archaeology and cultural resource management. So I think just the more experiences that students can get to try different things. My daughter is a ECU freshman, and this summer she's working on a research project with one of her professors. She did not want to do anthropology. She grew up in archaeological science and was like, yeah, no, that's not for me. So, but she's getting out there and she's getting the experiences, and she's coming home with, mosquito bites and all this, but she still loves it. But some other student might try it and go, ooh, I don't really like that.
Not for me, yeah.
Yeah. So, I just encourage them to get out there and try as much and come talk to us, like Scott said. I mean, I have an open door policy as much as, we're going to be allowed for that, this fall. But, I'm always available, or email me, call me, come see me. I'll share my experiences. If they ask me a question that I can't answer, I will do whatever I can to point them in a direction to someone who can. And it's, it takes time sometimes, for some of us anyway, to figure out what it is we want to do. But we have so many opportunities on campus in the Native American Studies program, and just on ECU campus in general, that I'm sure they'll find something that piques their interest enough to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear from both of you too, that just to celebrate the journey, right? That, it's going to take some time, but really just reaching out and kind of getting out of your box a little bit. Lindsay and I've talked about that, being willing to mentor and to talk to youth. I know when I go and speak to college students, I'm like, just practice on me, just call me up. You've already met me and interacted with me, so call me up. So I appreciate both of you giving that advice. Lindsay, did you have anything to offer in terms of, did you see yourself in anthropology? I know you're a huge advocate and protect cultural resources in our homeland, and are a fierce advocate in consultation meetings. Did you see yourself doing that when you were at OU?
Honestly, I had no idea that I would end up doing this. Originally, I was on the track to do health, Native American health, probably going to public health for my master's degree, for community-based prevention programs, such as diabetes prevention. I also thought about doing higher education, but by chance, I took Dr. Joe Watkins' class on tribal historic preservation, and I found it very, and I never dreamed that I would end up doing that professionally, though. And it's just one of those where I feel like sometimes Native studies may not be what you pick, but it's what picked. And I found that doing what I'm doing today, it wasn't a job that I thought I would be cultural resources management. I never thought I would be doing this job, but this job picked me, and I can't imagine myself not doing something with it now. And I really like, and Lee and Scott, you can put in your I really think Native American studies make you a very well-rounded individual. I feel like it trains so many different areas. You can pick track one, but if track doesn't work out, you've been trained in all these aspects, community and tribal government, and all of the things that surround the study of people. Unfortunately, that's still what it is. But there's a lot of different go to. Having that open is so very important, especially for Native who may be intimidated by approaching or someone in higher education, and having policy and being very connected, welcoming with your students is so very important, because kind of it breaks the ice. You know, it lets you know that it's okay if it's okay if I need help. And Dr. Brett at college at OU, he had this saying where he was there to protect us while we were in college. He was there to prepare. We're going to fall on our faces. It wasn't going to be out there where everybody else to get. So that open door policy and developing those relationships are so very important. And I'm glad that you guys do that. And I rambled a little bit, but just to go back to what your opinions were on American Studies, making very well-rounded individuals that can work in so many different areas. So if you have any to offer on that.
I mean, I totally agree with that in terms of, you know, as an area of study, Native American studies, you kind of get people who, some that are just interested in Native American issues, and then you get some who are very much interested in Native American because of their heritage, and that, you know, unfortunately, because of the boarding schools in the past, so many of us were disconnected from our own family histories, our own family stories. And so, you know, a lot of people come into NAS wanting that aspect of it as well, and which is kind of hard for an academic area of study, because it's also doing something that what people don't acknowledge, which is a very important part, which is increasing self-esteem and removing things like social trauma from people's lives. And you've got to be, as you teach these students, you've got to be prepared that sometimes it's going to hit really hard. That some of these things, when you learn some of these histories, it's not easy. When you learn the history of the Trail of Tears, or when I started reading documents about what went on for those Mississippi Choctaws that came in 1903 and 1902, it was not easy. And especially realizing those were my families and I was a product of those circumstances. And so it's not always easy. So you need people who know how to heal. It's a very healing endeavor. Native American studies is a very healing endeavor that I think sometimes people don't realize is an important aspect of education. Is healing is an important part of everything that we do. But it also it does help build character for a lot of people, and it helps build, I think, you know, it, like you said, you went into it thinking about one thing. You know, I got into it, I didn't necessarily know that I would end up becoming this person who studies research and does research on researchers. But I realized the importance. And Dr. Bread, you know, and Joe Watkins and Barbara Hobson, all of them had open door policies. And I've taken that into the way I approach things as well. You know, you could always go in to talk to Dr. Bread no matter what. He was always there to listen to you. And Joe Watkins' door was always open. You know, when his door was and he made sure it was open so that if you needed something, you know, you could go in and visit. And I think that sometimes we forget that we're helping young people navigate spaces that are not always easy for them. And so, you know, that's where, you know, as a mentor, you heal by helping others heal. And, you know, and at the same time, you know, and so it really does build well-rounded individuals that can go into areas of study. I don't think most people realize that NAS is like a mini college, because we an interdisciplinary approach, bring in methodologies from all kinds of disciplines. And so, and oftentimes it's very much shaped by our own tribal identities, you know, so bringing in things like Kui and the idea of service and broken foot, and that research should be like service to our community. And so these are all things that I think are very important about NAS, that it builds that. Can y'all still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you. I was just going to ask, Holly, do you have anything to add to that about the well-roundedness of a Native American Studies program on an individual going out into the world?
You know, that's one of the reasons I came to work here at ACU, because you know, Scott and I work really well together, and I believe we do both share those beliefs about helping students navigate the system. You know, we're there. I also had faculty that it was always open door. You know, and I was a introvert, as you mentioned earlier. You know, I was kind of the introverted person, and but my faculty helped me. They gave me the foundation and the security, like the security blanket, I guess, if you will, and helped me gain the confidence and to, you know, to pursue the goals that I had set for myself, even though I was shy. And yes, a college campus can be very intimidating for a lot of people. At times it can be intimidating for faculty, it's just, but, I believe that Scott and I both share that same desire for our students to help them achieve their goals, help them actually first identify. Sometimes they just don't even know, and we're there to help them identify where their interests are, and to give them the little push when they need it, not in a bad way, of course, but I'm also a mom, so I cannot, it's hard for me to even separate this mom mentality from my teaching, because I just want to help them succeed in whatever it is that they want to do. And Scott's a father, I'm sure he probably feels the same way. So, there's really not that much that I can add other than, I want to give back to our students what I received, and that was the open door policy. No, there was no such thing as a stupid question. If you have a question, you just need to ask it, and if you don't want to ask it in front of the class, come see me and ask me, come hang out with me. I'll tell you all my stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, about my experiences, and it's just, that's why I came here, is because I felt like the Native American Studies program and all the faculty so far that I've come into contact with at ECU seem to share those values as well. It's all about the students, and that's what I care about.
That's awesome to hear. Well, Lindsay, did you have anything else to add today?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I want to thank Scott and for joining us, guys. And thank you for answering the questions that I had. And Deanna.
All right. Well, I just want to, say thank you, big yokoki, for the both of you to join us today for our Tosholi speaker series. You have done an amazing job talking about just one unique university. Hopefully we can have other professionals, professors come on and talk about this. Well, one of the passions that I have, I know Lindsay joins me in that, is really helping shape our community's future leaders, our future generation that's going to take over this work. And so I really appreciate both of you, Holly, Scott, for sharing a little bit about your projects, your goals for your community of Native American Studies students. I'm really excited to see what the partnerships with tribal communities in Oklahoma end up turning out to be, and hopefully we'll get some of these students maybe to job shadow or to volunteer, or even just a phone call. That would be nice, because wherever they go on their journey, whether they decide to choose the STEM field, anthropology, wherever they end up, it sounds like that we are all on the same page of encouraging them to do so. So I appreciate you guys being here today. Thank you everyone who's watching and listening. We appreciate it, and join us in 2 weeks. We'll see you. Yakakui.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yokoki. Bye-bye.